Some people always get better deals. Not because they're louder. Not because they're ruthless. Quietly, they get the higher salary, lower rent, waived fee, better car price. And the strange part? They don't know magic words. When pressure shows up, their brain simply doesn't panic. Most people think negotiation is about knowing the perfect sentence. It isn't. Because when the moment gets uncomfortable, you don't rise to your best script. You fall to your trained reaction. A recruiter says, "This is our best offer," and your brain hears, "Don't ruin this." A landlord raises the rent, and your body says, "Just accept it before this gets awkward." A salesperson says, "This deal ends today," and suddenly pressure starts feeling like opportunity. That's not logic. That's your nervous system trying to escape discomfort. People who get better deals are not always more confident. They are not always more experienced. They simply don't treat negotiation like social danger. They can pause without apologizing. They can ask without feeling greedy. They can hear no without turning it into humiliation. That is the real difference. Better deals don't start with better words. They start with a brain that doesn't panic the moment the price, offer, or terms become uncomfortable. They don't worship the first number. This is where most people lose before the negotiation even begins. Someone gives them a number, and their brain immediately treats it like reality. A recruiter says, "The salary is $72,000. A landlord says, "Your rent is going up by $250. A car dealer says, "Your monthly payment would be $540. A contractor says, "This job will be $8,000. And most people don't hear a starting point. They hear a wall. Their mind starts adjusting around that number. They begin asking smaller questions. Can I afford this? Is this normal? Maybe this is just how much things cost now. But people who consistently get better deals understand something most people forget. The first number is not just information. It is an anchor. It trains your expectations before you even realize your expectations are being trained. Once a number is placed in your mind, everything after that feels close or far away from it. A $540 car payment starts to make $510 feel like a win, even if the real problem is that you should have been discussing the total price, the interest rate, and the fees. A $250 rent increase makes $150 feel generous, even if the landlord had room to keep it flat for a reliable tenant. A salary offer makes you wonder if asking for $5,000 more is too much, even though the company may have had $10,000 more available in the range. This is why the people who get better deals pause. Not dramatically, not rudely. They simply don't bow to the first number. They let it sit there. Then they ask, calmly, "Is there any flexibility here?" Or, "Can you walk me through how you arrived at that number?" Or, "What options do we have to improve the terms?" That one pause changes everything. Because the moment you stop treating the first number as final, the conversation becomes a negotiation instead of a reaction. And that is the difference. Most people respond to the first number emotionally. Better negotiators investigate it. They understand that a price is often not a truth. It is an opening move. They don't experience no as humiliation. This is the part most people never admit. They are not afraid of negotiating. They are afraid of how they will feel if the answer is no. A recruiter says, "We can't go higher," and suddenly it feels personal. A landlord says, "That's the new rent," and you feel small for even asking. A salesperson says, "I can't do that price," and part of you wants to apologize for making things uncomfortable. So most people stop before the real conversation begins. They reject themselves first. They don't ask for the higher salary because they imagine the recruiter judging them. They don't challenge the rent increase because they imagine the landlord getting annoyed. They don't question the car price because they imagine looking cheap, difficult, or inexperienced. And that imagined embarrassment becomes more powerful than the actual money on the table. But people who get better deals have separated the answer from their identity. To them, no is not humiliation. It is information. It tells them where the other side stands right now. Not forever, not morally, not personally, just right now. That difference is enormous. Because once no stops feeling like an attack, you become willing to ask better questions. Is that final? What would make it possible? Is there another way to structure this? Can we revisit the bonus, the fees, the timing, or the terms? They don't hear no and collapse. They hear no and get curious. And that curiosity is where better deals often begin. Most people treat rejection like a door slamming shut. Better negotiators treat it like a map. It shows them where the wall is, where the opening might be, and whether this deal is even worth continuing. That's why they ask more calmly. That's why they recover faster. That's why they don't need every conversation to protect their ego. Because they understand something simple but powerful. A rejected request is not a rejected person. It is just the price of finding out what is possible. They can sit inside silence. Silence is where most people give the deal away. Not because the other side forced them to. Because the silence felt unbearable. A recruiter gives an offer, and before the number has even settled, they say, "That sounds good." A salesperson says the price, pauses, and the customer rushes in with, "I mean, if that's the best you can do." A landlord explains the rent increase, and the tenant immediately softens their own position. "No worries, I understand. Everything is expensive now." That little moment feels harmless. But it is not harmless. Because in negotiation, silence creates pressure. And most people accidentally take that pressure off the other side and put it on themselves. They rescue the conversation from discomfort. They fill the gap. They explain too much. They apologize too early. They negotiate themselves down just to make the room feel normal again. But people who get better deals understand silence differently. They don't treat it as danger. They treat it as space. Space to think. Space to observe. Space for the other person to reveal whether the number is firm, whether there is flexibility, whether they are nervous, whether they expected pushback. They don't weaponize silence. They simply don't fear it. After hearing a price, they pause. After asking for better terms, they pause. After the other side says, "That's the best we can do," they pause. And that pause does something powerful. It stops the automatic surrender. It tells the other side calmly that the conversation is not over just because a number was spoken. Most people think the strongest person in the negotiation is the one who talks the most. Often, it is the person who can stay calm the longest without rushing to make everyone comfortable. Because silence is not empty. Silence is where pressure reveals itself. And if you can sit inside it without apologizing, you give yourself time to find the better deal hiding underneath the first reaction. They don't need to be liked by the person selling to them. This is where nice people lose money quietly. Not because they are stupid, because they are trying to protect a relationship that barely exists. A salesperson smiles, remembers their name, compliments their choice, and suddenly the customer doesn't want to seem difficult. A recruiter sounds warm and excited, and the candidate feels guilty asking for more. A landlord says, "I've always been fair with you," and the tenant starts treating a rent increase like a personal loyalty test. This is how the deal changes. It stops being about terms. It becomes about identity. You don't want to look cheap. You don't want to look ungrateful. You don't want to be the person who makes things awkward. So you become easy. Easy to approve. Easy to rush. Easy to charge, easy to move past the details. But people who get better deals understand something uncomfortable. The person selling to you can be kind and still be representing their own interest. The recruiter can be friendly and still be trying to keep compensation inside budget. The landlord can be polite and still be trying to raise profit. The salesperson can be likable and still be trained to protect margin. That does not make them evil. It makes them human, and it means you are allowed to protect your side too. People who get better deals do not become rude. They simply stop confusing approval with fairness. They can smile and still ask, "Is there any flexibility?" They can be respectful and still say, "I'd like to compare a few options." They can appreciate the offer and still respond, "I need to review the full terms before I decide." That is the difference. Most people try to be liked inside the negotiation. Better negotiators try to be clear, because the need to be liked becomes expensive when it makes you abandon your own side of the table. And once you understand that, negotiation stops feeling like betrayal. It becomes something much healthier. Two people, two sets of interests, one conversation about what is actually fair. They understand that standard often means unchallenged. This one word ends more negotiations than almost anything else. Standard. A dealer says, that fee is standard. A landlord says, that increase is standard. A company says, this is our standard offer. A service provider says, that's just our standard rate. And most people stop right there. Because standard sounds official. It sounds final. It sounds like a rule written somewhere by someone more powerful than you. So they nod. They accept it. They tell themselves, I guess that's just how it works. But people who get better deals hear that word differently. They don't hear standard as the end of the conversation. They hear it as the beginning of a question. Standard for whom? Standard under what conditions? Standard for every customer, or standard for customers who don't ask? Because sometimes standard really does mean fixed, but sometimes it means nobody has challenged it yet. And the people who get better deals don't challenge it with anger. They challenge it with curiosity. They ask, is there any exception available? They ask, who would be able to review this? They ask, are there any promotions, credits, waivers, or alternative terms? They ask, if that part is fixed, what part is flexible? That last question matters. Because good negotiators don't waste energy fighting every wall. They look for doors. Maybe the salary range is fixed, but the signing bonus is not. Maybe the rent increase is firm, but the parking fee can be waived. Maybe the car price is tight, but the dealer add-ons, financing terms, or service package are not. Maybe the monthly bill cannot drop, but a loyalty credit can appear. Most people hear standard and shrink. Better negotiators hear standard and investigate. They understand that many systems are designed to reward the person who asks one more calm question. Not 10 aggressive questions. Not a speech. Not a fight. Just one more calm question after most people would have stopped. And that is why they keep finding better deals hiding behind words that were designed to sound final. They create options before they need them. This is where real negotiation power comes from. Not from confidence. Not from a perfect script. Options. Most people negotiate when they are already trapped. They have one job offer, so every sentence feels dangerous. They found one apartment they like, so the rent increase feels impossible to question. They visit one car dealership, so the salesperson's price becomes the whole market. They get one contractor quote, one insurance renewal, one phone bill, one lender, one path forward. And once there is only one option, the brain gets scared. Because now you are not just negotiating a deal. You are negotiating your sense of safety. What if they say no? What if I lose this? What if I have to start over? That fear makes people smaller. They ask for less. They accept faster. They call surrender being realistic. But people who get better deals do something different. They build options before the pressure arrives. Before the salary conversation, they understand the market. Before renewing rent, they check comparable apartments. Before buying the car, they get multiple quotes. Before accepting a service price, they ask another provider. Before the bill renews, they know what competitors charge. So when the other side says, this is the best we can do, they don't panic. Because their entire future is not trapped inside that one answer. That is the hidden strength of options. Options calm the nervous system. Options make silence easier. Options make no less terrifying. Options make walking away feel possible instead of dramatic. And this is why some people seem naturally confident in negotiation. They are not always braver. They are less cornered. Confidence is much easier when you are not begging one door to stay open. Most people wait until they need leverage to look for leverage. Better negotiators create leverage early. They know that the best time to build options is before your emotions are attached, before urgency takes over, before the other side realizes you have nowhere else to go. Because once you have options, negotiation changes. You stop asking from desperation. You start deciding from choice. They don't confuse urgency with truth. Urgency is one of the oldest pressure tools in negotiation. And it works because it does something very specific to the brain. It makes thinking feel dangerous. A salesperson says, "This deal ends today." A landlord says, "I have 3 other applicants interested." A recruiter says, "We need your answer by tomorrow morning." A service provider says, "This rate is only available if you sign now." And suddenly the decision changes. You are no longer asking, "Is this a good deal?" You are asking, "What if I lose it?" That fear is powerful. Because once your brain believes an opportunity is disappearing, it stops evaluating the terms clearly. It starts protecting access. Access to the job. Access to the apartment. Access to the car. Access to the discount. Access to the feeling that you still have a chance. And that is when people accept things they would have questioned if they had one more day to think. They skip the fine print. They ignore the fees. They stop comparing. They tell themselves, "I should just take it before it's gone." But people who get better deals understand something most people forget. Urgency is not the same as truth. Sometimes the deadline is real. Sometimes the apartment really does have other applicants. Sometimes the offer really does expire. But sometimes urgency is just a tool designed to move you faster than your judgment can catch up. So they slow the moment down. Not forever. Just enough to think. They ask, "What specifically changes after today?" They ask, "Can I have the full terms in writing before I decide?" They ask, "If I take a few hours to review this, will the offer still be available?" They ask, "What happens if I don't decide right now?" Those questions reveal a lot. Because real urgency can usually be explained. Fake urgency usually gets louder. And that difference matters. People who get better deals are not immune to pressure. They feel it. They just don't let pressure become proof. They know a good deal can survive a little thinking. A bad deal often needs you rushed. That is why they rarely make expensive decisions in a state of panic. They do not confuse speed with opportunity. They do not confuse pressure with value. They do not confuse someone else's timeline with their own best interest. Because once you let urgency control the room, the other side no longer has to improve the deal. They only have to make you afraid of losing it. They have already decided who they are before the deal begins. This is the deepest difference. People who get better deals are not just using better tactics. They are negotiating from a different identity. Most people enter a negotiation asking the wrong silent question. How do I avoid making this awkward? How do I make them like me? How do I not seem greedy? How do I get through this without tension? And once those questions take over, the deal is already tilted. Because now the goal is not fairness. The goal is emotional safety. But people who get better deals have made a decision before the conversation starts. They have decided, "I am allowed to ask. I am allowed to compare. I am allowed to pause. I am allowed to protect my money. I am allowed to walk away from terms that do not work for me." That permission changes everything. Because negotiation is not only about what you say. It is about what you believe you are allowed to say. If you believe asking makes you difficult, you will soften every request. If you believe comparing offers makes you disloyal, you will accept worse terms. If you believe walking away makes you rude, you will stay inside deals that quietly punish you. But if you believe your side of the table matters, your behavior changes. You stop apologizing for reasonable questions. You stop accepting pressure as proof. You stop treating every no like a personal wound. You stop confusing someone else's comfort with your responsibility. That does not make you aggressive. It makes you present, fully present in a conversation where most people disappear from their own interests. And this is why some people seem so calm. They are not waiting for the other side to give them permission. They already gave it to themselves. Before the salary call, before the rent renewal, before the dealership, before the bill negotiation, before the contract. They decided they were not there to be liked, rushed, flattered, or quietly managed into a worse deal. They were there to understand the terms. And if the terms were not fair, they were allowed to ask, allowed to pause, allowed to leave. That is the psychology of people who always get better deals. They do not become someone else. They finally stop abandoning themselves. You don't need to become louder to get better deals. You don't need to become rude, cold, or impossible to work with. You just need to stop disappearing the moment the terms become uncomfortable. Ask one more question. Take one more pause. Read one more line. Compare one more option. Because better deals are not made by people who never feel pressure. They are made by people who no longer let pressure make the decision for them. And once you learn that, you don't just negotiate differently. You live differently.